know enough about it really to, um, uh, yeah, I don't know enough about it. I just figured I'd come in for a couple days and help. So yeah, no, it's all good. Let's see. Okay, and is anybody on yet? Nobody's on yet. It's okay. That's okay. All right, so Gilia's going to come in, and we have Richard here as well. Um, so we'll wait for a moment, and then um, I didn't print out anything because actually I have a particular discussion that I want to have that's sort of like more of a 30, more of a view of 30,000 feet, if you will. Hello, hello. How's it going? Doing okay, thank goodness. Doing all right. Um,
Hello, how are you? I'm well, how are you? Good to see you.
Thank you. Likewise.
You look warm.
I am warm. Thank you. Yes, I hate being cold.
So do I.
I know you usually wear your warm coat for services.
so welcome, and
Thank you.
hopefully, we're on YouTube. We don't have anybody on Zoom at the moment, so we'll see. I mean, we'll see if that evolves. But I didn't print out a text because I actually want to kind of step back for a moment and talk about uh, something I read about Jewish law in general, and hopefully we can have a little bit of a discussion about it. And and I'll put it on the screen here, the passage that I saw that I found particularly intriguing, and also I want to make sure I'm putting the right thing on there. Okay, okay, so I've got this. So I'll have this on the screen. I'll read it out loud as well as we talk about it. But it's basically, musings about halacha, about Jewish law in general. Um, we have, I guess, another guest here. We have hello.
Hello, Cooper.
A dog just came in. It's all good. So so this was a post that I saw on Facebook, and it is a post by the account is called Masorti Judaism in the UK.
Oh. Mhm.
So now, just in case you need a quick explanation, so Masorti, Masorah means tradition, and Masorti is the title of conservative Judaism, basically outside of North America. Now, there are some differences in some of the policies that Masorti Judaism has adopted in Israel, for instance, Masorti Judaism in Israel, Masorti Judaism in, I guess, the United Kingdom, um, and other countries compared to the conservative movement of North America. In other words, the two are not necessarily always aligned, and that's something important to know when when I go through this. Um, so
How does Jonathan Sachs play into Masorti? Is he Orthodox?
Jonathan Sachs was definitely Orthodox. And hi, Will.
Hey.
Hello. All right. So we have a couple of other people here. They are on. They are in person with me. So yeah. So it's actually interesting that you bring up Rabbi Jonathan Sachs because
He's British. Sorry, Jewish. Sorry.
he was really, he really was. And I've read different things about him. One being that as sort of accessible as his writing is and how I would have you, he apparently wasn't as pluralistic as he might have sounded. That he was not
In his personal preference.
personal preferences, and also some of his policies. I think his writing made him sound a little more pluralistic, but maybe not so much. Okay. But with that said, Rabbi Sachs, there was something I saw about how somebody wrote a paper or some article or something about how Rabbi Sachs got a lot of information, got a lot of his ideas from Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who was one of the most prominent and important conservative rabbis of the 20th century. Now, so it's like, Rabbi Sachs maybe was a little more, not necessarily always orthodox. Then again,
I think there was some of the mystical too from Abraham Joshua Heschel, and that Sachs had some of that too.
I think there's some of that, the mystical connection, the connection in terms of mysticism. Also, that Rabbi Heschel, I mean, he was part of the conservative movement. He grew up Hasidic, so to basically say that I would guess that Rabbi Heschel and I are probably two fairly different rabbis. Even though we were both under the same umbrella. Okay. So anyway, so Rabbi Sachs would, I don't think he would have called himself Masorti. I think he would have called himself Orthodox. But all right, so all this is background to what I have here on the screen about this musing about halacha. Halacha, it says, was never meant to be all or nothing. Jewish life has always assumed struggle, partial fulfillment, and contradiction. I'm going to stop here for a second or I'll pause in the reading of this and to say that this is something often not articulated and something that is, I know the last at least couple of times that we've had Lunch and Learn, we've talked about, okay, well, what if you forget this part of the Amidah? Or you forget to say the Amidah, or you don't say the Amidah this time, okay, how can you make up for it and things like that? So there is within halacha already an understanding, as we saw, of you're not going to hit the mark every time, right? It's an expectation, but to then excoriate or to look down upon people who don't hit the mark 100% would be folly, right? Because so there's always, like the sentence says, assumed a certain like partial fulfillment, right? You're not always going to do it. Like it happens, right?
You're only expected to try.
Right. I remember getting an email. I was late paying a bill. And I remember getting an email from whatever the company was, and the title of the email says, "It happens." In other words, they still want and expect their money. There's still going to be a late payment, a late fee or whatever it is, but don't be like we're not contacting you to yell at you. We're not contacting you to make you feel like dirt, right? We're contacting you because I mean, you still owe us money, but like don't. But this is not a judgment on your character, right? So to me, it's kind of a similar thing. Okay. It goes on to say, if perfect consistency were required, very few Jews would ever have shown up. Okay. And by the way, I think that this is one of the struggles. Again, I'm now talking as me. This is one of the struggles that we have, I think, when we are anyone who is embracing Judaism, right, is converting, or even if you're born Jewish and you're trying to consider taking on more and more observance, right? one of the most difficult things is looking at all of the vastness of Judaism and say, wait a second, I have to do all of this? How am I possibly going to do all of this? And because and it's understandable to have that feeling, because here you are wanting to embrace the tradition. Like your heart is into it, but it's like, do I have the time, the money, the energy, the everything to do everything? Right. And that becomes a major deterrent potentially. So that's the beginning. That's the beginning of the statement. Then the next paragraph. At the same time, halacha isn't just personal preference. To be obligated is to be claimed by something larger than convenience, even when we can't or won't do everything that binds us. This is one of the misconceptions. So now talking off of this, this is one of the misconceptions that I think some people have about conservative Judaism, in that there's some people who lump conservative and reform Judaism together in the sense that, well, reform is picking and choosing, and therefore conservative is also just picking and choosing. It's all just picking and choosing, is what some may argue. Now, first of all, picking and choosing, I don't want to say that as necessarily a negative thing, because embedded in the philosophy of Reform Judaism is the idea of autonomy. So, it's like, if you don't like the idea of picking and choosing, all right, that's your preference. But in Reform, to say that, I'm going to do some of this and, some of that, et cetera, that's perfectly okay according to Reform philosophy, at least as I understand it. If there's, I'm willing to be corrected if I'm misinterpreting it. But my understanding is that autonomy is really a key thing. That is not the premise under which conservative Judaism operates. Conservative Judaism operates under the idea of we are still bound by this. It is not simply the idea that we have so many things that are just optional. Again, I don't want to say that as a negative thing, but that isn't how, at least philosophically, how we do this. Okay, so with me so far. Okay, all right. So then this post goes on. The question of driving to shul on Shabbat lives in that tension. Okay. Now, next paragraph starts with, in 1950, a conservative teshuva, meaning it's a responsa of Jewish law in the United States, permitted driving to shul as suburbs spread beyond walking distance. It reshaped American Jewish life. Outside the United States, Masorti communities didn't adopt the teshuva. Instead, they chose to focus on building walkable local Jewish life. That difference isn't about being stricter or looser. It's about the kind of community we imagine. So, me talking again, not the post. That is, I think, that last statement there is one of the I think something that I appreciate more than almost anything I've read, because it's what I try to explain to people is that it's very easy to look at Orthodox, conservative, Reform Judaism as Orthodox, they're the strictest, conservative, they're the less strict, and Reform is the least strict. That's not it's not on a scale, right?
Right.
It's not like to be an observant Reform Jew is to observe Judaism strictly according to Reformed Jewish understanding. Meanwhile, I would say that there are many Orthodox Jews that are not strict Orthodox Jews,
Mm.
right? So, in other words, the continuum is on these different, so in other words, like you can be a strict conservative Jew and not so strict conservative Jew. You can be a strict Reform Jew and not so strict. Like, I mean, in other words, just to simply say that, and I think I've mentioned this other times. One of the things that would sometimes bother me is when someone I would meet. I remember like going to I went to a doctor one time. The doctor was Jewish, and it's like, oh, what do you do for a living? Oh, I'm a rabbi. Oh, okay. Well, yeah, because they were, it's like, oh, well, like I'm sorry. I'm not observant. I'm yeah, I'm not observant. I'm really, really reform. I'm really reform. It's like, okay, to me, to be really reform means you're attending synagogue, you're for Reform Temple often. You're doing social justice work. No, I mean, to be really reform is to be heavily invested in the reform movement. To say, oh, I'm really, really reform doesn't mean I'm really not an observant Jew.
Which is what he was saying.
That's what he was saying, right? Exactly. So that's a misconception that I feel like is important to try to correct. So when this post said that the difference between adopting the permission to drive to synagogue on Shabbat or the decision to not adopt that, it's not that the people driving to synagogue on Shabbat that approve that is being less observant. So Will is asking a question, is the greatest differences in services? I've often found that to be the case. In other words, like when you, so I would say, um, in general, yes, I would expand that to the idea of style, right? The difference many times between conservative, Reform, Orthodox is the style in which they observe. And that style is clearly evident in services. So, but the style of services definitely depends on also like what synagogue you're a part of, right? Um, I've been to numerous conservative synagogues in which the style of the service is much different. Look, we have that even within our one synagogue here, right? We have, the contemporary service and the traditional service. Those are two pretty different services in terms of style, right? It doesn't, it obviously doesn't make one better than the other. It's a very different style. So yeah, well, I would say that it is maybe most clearly evident in services, but I think there's also a larger
And no Musaf.
category. Right. Reform doesn't do Musaf in their services. And which, by the way, and this is going to get into a very technical thing, there have been times in which I have led, in which as as part of services, I have considered the possibility of not doing the Musaf service because you can do the Musaf service at other times of the day.
Uh-huh.
You are not time bound by Shacharit. But unlike the Reform understanding where Musaf is not relevant, and they have their reasons for believing that, the conservative movement, we said, no, Musaf is still relevant. But we also know that according to halacha, you can do it at any time. So you could potentially have a synagogue, like a synagogue service on a Saturday morning in which we don't say Musaf, and that could be potentially legitimate. The reason why we do Musaf together is because, well, we're here. We're here, and we it's like, because we don't want to convey the idea that just because we're not doing Musaf, that doesn't mean that it's optional.
Right.
So, and because Musaf on Shabbat is relatively short, might as well. Might as well do it. So, okay. So I found that to be particularly compelling. Okay, so back to this post. So if someone drives to shul and feels awkward, that's not hypocrisy. It's a sign that halacha still matters. The question isn't, am I good or bad? But what kind of Jewish life am I building and with whom? That tension is where real Jewish life happens. So I find it very interesting because I kind of want to talk about this, and maybe this is a little bit of my own personal, I don't mean that this to turn into therapy or anything like that, but when I started to go to synagogue, so this is actually fueled from my father. After my bar mitzvah, my father said, you know what, we as a family need to go to synagogue every week. We need to attend every Saturday. And his feeling was that Friday nights we need to have Shabbat dinner together, whereas we didn't necessarily have Shabbat dinner on Friday nights. And we had dinner, but we didn't do blessings and everything like that. But then on Saturday, and then on Saturdays, it's like, all right, let's go to synagogue. So we start doing that for a few months now. And then my father's like, he said to me, I'm the oldest of the three of the three siblings. We should walk to services.
Could you?
Okay.
Within the mile?
4 miles.
Oh, that's a lot.
A lot. 4 miles.
Ooh.
And this was in June. Now Denver, Colorado can get, pretty hot at times. I would say, so it's like, okay, really? We're going to do this? So we drove, so the first time we did it, we walked there. It took about an hour. We got to services maybe, I think what services would begin at like 9:30, we'd get there around 10. So we would leave at 9, get there around 10. We would do services, we'd do Kiddush, and then we'd walk back. The first time we did it, I know this is going to sound, again, hypocritical, but the first time we did it, like on the way back, we stopped at a gas station and got something to drink because it was a lot.
Yeah.
It was a lot.
Dehydrated.
And it took a little while to kind of build up our endurance. After a little while, after a number of months, my father didn't really want to do it anymore, or at least not on a regular basis. But I said, I still want to do it because I like doing it. And my parents said, if you do that, that's fine, as long as you carry a quarter with you.
A quarter.
Because in case I needed a payphone in case of emergency. So
how old were you at the time?
I think I was 15.
Okay.
So in case of emergency, that I should have a quarter in case I need to use a payphone. Fine. So I did. So about that quarter, right? I mean, because the idea is that you're not supposed to carry money
Right.
on Shabbat.
Right.
Okay, you're not supposed to, use money. And so I remember talking about that with one of my teachers. I was still, attending a Jewish day school. And my teacher said to me, my teacher who's Orthodox said to me, she's like, and she wasn't trying to, say that I was, being bad or anything like that, but she said, okay, to me, an emergency is an emergency, meaning there's no need to carry a quarter. If it's an emergency, you knock on somebody's door and say, "Can I please use your telephone?" Because, and the assumption is that an emergency would happen so infrequently that to carry around money on every Shabbat just in case was not worthwhile. So I would say that her response is similar to the response of, no, we're not going to allow driving on Shabbat, but instead we're going to figure out how do we make Shabbat life more accessible for people who wish to walk to services. And maybe some of those solutions are things like you open up a satellite minyan. Some places do, right? They will say, all right, well, let's, for the people who live out there but still want to be part of the congregation, let's make sure we have, a decent number of Jewish adults so that we can make a minyan, and let's make sure we have, and we can gather at somebody's house, and we have a Torah scroll, and we bring Sidurim before Shabbat. Like, in other words, like, and it would be an extension of the main synagogue service. In other words, just have a satellite service. That's one possibility, right? Another possibility is, well, and by the way, one of the big barriers in, why was the driving to Shuva considered a necessity in the United States? The origin of it is because of the suburban sprawl and because synagogues were located probably in downtown areas in a lot of cases, and people could no longer afford to live downtown, or if they wanted to have decent amount of space to live in, it basically became unaffordable. All right, so what do you do in that case? There is so one of the Orthodox synagogues in Charleston, the synagogue bought a house, and they bought a house that they basically leave vacant on Shabbat. Or they leave, I mean, like, there's no permanent resident in that house. But there are a number of bedrooms that have beds. And the idea is that you want to come to synagogue and you live too far away to walk, stay at the house on Shabbat. And you can have a bed, and you can have, bathrooms, etc. And snacks or what have you. And so in other words, like, they pooled their resources in order to make it so that the people who couldn't afford it or just didn't have any way of getting something like, so in other words, those are strategies where they say, okay, we want to make it possible for there to be a walking community on Shabbat. Therefore, we're going to do everything in our power to make it possible for people of different economic means and different, whatever their circumstances are, to be able to be fully a part of the community. And that takes energy and money and all these other things. it can be very difficult to just say, well, if you want to be a part of our community and if you want, if you want to walk, you have to buy a house around here. All right, well, I can't afford the $1 million houses around here. Tough luck. Right?
Yeah.
They, as opposed to taking that attitude, they're like, okay, what can we do about this? It's a very different approach than saying, okay, well, it's going to be too hard, so we're just going to let people drive. But sometimes it really is too hard. Sometimes it really is. And, and considering, that, um, uh, so, so those are some of the tensions that exist within it. And part of what a, part of our responsibility as a community that dedicates itself to Jewish law is to do what you can to make it possible to have meaningful experiences for other people who want to observe that, not just the people who can afford to do it.
I don't know if Will can hear me. Maybe I shouldn't talk.
No, it's okay. Here, I'll move you a little closer here.
Will, can you hear me? Maybe.
Yes, I was getting ready to send a comment to the rabbi. I wish all the synagogues in the area would do something at least as far as south as Farragut. Y'all could have Friday night because you don't normally do a Friday night as often as you do Saturday, I guess. And the Reformed synagogue could, do Saturday because they don't normally have Saturday services, and Chabad and Oak Ridge could do what they want to. It'd be a lot easier. There's plenty of Jews down here in Tellico Village, and some go, and a lot more I don't think do go to Knoxville to a synagogue.
Yeah, that's possible. So yeah, Gil, you wanted to say?
Yeah, I wanted to say that when I lived in Pittsburgh, my synagogue was on a little hill. And it was a residential area with one-family homes. And so we would, and there were lots of side streets.
Yeah.
It was on the main street, and then there were side streets. So we would drive and park on the side street and then walk up the little hill to the entrance of the synagogue.
Right.
So that we wouldn't drive in the parking lot on Shabbat. And so
Yeah,
one way to solve that.
that's one way to deal with it. And there are that does happen a lot where it's like and now a lot of people have a lot of rabbis of all stripes have taken the point of view of saying, I don't care how you get here. Or at least saying like, or or maybe they care, but they're not going to, they're going to welcome you all the same, right? And that's important to enable people who, let's say they are considering being part of the synagogue community, but they're not there yet in terms of their observance. So it's a it's a conversation of like, what does it mean to take care of people who are, wanting to be a part of things, right? Is the institution doing enough to make it possible for someone to live a rich Jewish life? And it's always a hard balance, right? So, Will, when you're talking about doing Friday night services, could there be Friday night services in other locations? That's actually something I did for a time when I was in Charleston, where once a month I did a Friday night service at a different person's home.
Yeah, that's a nice idea.
And we had Friday, and I went a bunch of different places around Charleston because it's like, okay, well, like there was an area known as Somerville, which is probably as far away from the synagogue that Farragut is, right? Um, and I found somebody's home in Somerville, and we tried to, and the idea was that we would ask the person, could we host services there? And okay, could you try to bring people who live around the area? Because if your concern is that I would come to the main synagogue, but it's too much of a schlep. Okay, we're bringing it to you. Now, to do that, however, I was willing to drive
Right.
to, so I was willing to drive from where I lived to those locations. That was not something that that was not something that so that doesn't fulfill all of that. In other words, if I were concerned about the whole driving thing, I would say, well, I'm going to spend Shabbat. I'm going to spend like all of Shabbat at that location and just do Friday night services and Saturday services and just sort of hang out there. So I again, I truly appreciated this post for kind of giving a very realistic understanding of what Jewish law is and can be. And I feel like we need to be reminded of that from time to time, especially the way it began, that Jewish life has always assumed struggle, partial fulfillment, and contradiction. That I think there are many times in which we are so concerned about consistency that we don't give people the opportunity to grow.
Yeah, it can be stifling.
Yeah.
It can. In fact, that's, Martin Buber struggled with that a lot. That the petrified Judaism, that existed, that he knew from Eastern Europe.
So tell us more about that, because I don't know much about Martin Buber.
Well,
I mean, I know a little, but but yeah.
Well, he this is why he did not go to synagogue. He had a bar mitzvah because his grandfather was a big midrash scholar, and he grew up with his grandparents because his father divorced and married somebody else, and he lived in Eastern Europe, and he never went to synagogue after his bar mitzvah because he said that Judaism is petrified. It's, in other words, stuck, right, in a rut, and that it wasn't spiritual. And so he preferred to go to the prophets instead of going to services. And he would study the prophets and write about the prophets, and because he felt that they had spirit. While the synagogue didn't have spirit anymore.
So he would write about like the books of the prophets.
Right.
He would study them and try to understand them. Interesting.
And then that became his dad. And then Hasidism. There was a lot of Hasidic life around there in that area, and so he would get in contact with a Hasidim, and he wrote this famous translation of Hasidic tales.
Sure.
Or that was published in German in 1908 or so. And but so between Hasidism and the prophets, he found his milieu, intellectual milieu and spiritual, and that's what he spent the rest of his life on, talking about these kinds of things, and Zionism.
Yeah.
So Zionism was big for him. So.
Sure. No, I mean, and that's the idea of Judaism being petrified, being like stuck in
a rut.
Stuck in a rut, yeah. And
it was choking itself.
Hmm.
It didn't allow for growth, as you were saying, you know, it didn't allow for growth and for, you know, development. And I mean, he felt with the Eastern European Judaism that he knew, right?
Yeah.
And that's all he knew at that time. So,
I remember this person, I remember reading, you know, an email from a person, not of the synagogue, and, you know, won't reveal the name, but where he was frustrated with certain things that was happening at the congregation. And he says at one point, "This is not the congregation my wife and I joined, you know, however many years ago." And my feeling is, it probably isn't.
right.
Right. It's not supposed to be the same
Yeah.
congregation, right? And so either you know, so if all you're doing is pining for what once was,
Gotcha.
then you know, I mean, yeah, if all you're doing is pining for what once was, then uh, you know, people are going to grow with, or are going to grow without you, you know, and it's like, obviously you want to take people along if they're willing to go along to whatever, you know, journey it is. um I'm glad I'm glad this person stayed in at the congregation. I'm glad that, you know, didn't give up. But it was really, you know, but reading that made me think, it's like, are we supposed to be the same congregation all the time? Like, there's you know, you know, the question of like continuity. uh, you know, we like the idea of we obviously like the idea of a tradition, but tradition for tradition's sake
Mhm.
is not a formula for long-term success. um and you know, and on the you know, the force that kind of drives against that is the force of the fact that we as human beings, this is the, you know, the, to me, like the ultimate contradiction. We as human beings are always changing, right? Isn't it that like every 7 years our cells completely whatever it is, they completely, like, you know, appear, you know, become anew,
Right.
right? We are literally changing all the time, and yet we are so afraid of change.
Mm.
In general, we are so afraid of change. um so uh, to understand that as not as a problem, but as a tension, right? Tensions are not the same as problems. Problems are something that, like, there's an issue, we're going to solve it. Tensions are things that are difficult, that are not really meant to be solved at all. But we just live in the uncomfortable ability of it all.
They're a challenge.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's really what I wanted to talk about today. And we can obviously, you know, we have a little more time if we want to talk about other things, but I wanted to at least, you know, bring that discussion to light, and to kind of remind everybody that, you know, as we will continue to go through any number of things, you know, any number of laws, and discuss how laws are to be observed and everything like that, let's not forget that those laws, you know, it's like, let's not forget that to not feel bad if we're not doing things exactly as it says,
Yeah.
and that, okay,
Well, there's a big difference between the 16th century and now, right?
no question, big
It
difference.
has changed. And so I think it's great that we managed to keep the main points of the tradition, that we can continue to observe those and, do those. And, but that some of the things that are on like the periphery, are, oh, well, that was then, but now it's a little different because times have changed,
Right,
so
right.
like that.
Yeah. Anybody have anything else they want to talk about this or about something else?
Well, I would say that I get more out of this rabbi's classes and other classes than I do going to services anywhere.
Oh,
Like
okay.
I agree
like
with you, Will.
I didn't really accept the doctrine when I went to Protestant churches when I was a kid, when I was sort of drugged. But the only part of those services I ever liked was like I seemed like it was an hour, maybe it's only a half hour that the minister talked, and it was like the class. And whether or not I graded what he said on that, but I went there I went there because I hadn't have a choice, but the most I got out of it was the class, not the ritual. And the same way now. And I get completely lost when it's Hebrew, and it's kind of like you gotta tolerate the Hebrew, or you gotta tolerate a choir if you go someplace down the street to get around, and maybe there'll be a sermon, and there's really hardly any sermons anywhere. So I get more out of these classes here, or other places I found online. Like the first synagogue in the United States when I came back ever went to was the Reformed Synagogue in Savannah, and I watch the services there sometime, but it's pretty short. And then he does a Wednesday class that's, unfortunately, you had to watch Hollywood Squares on that one, though. I don't know what he's doing, what you're doing. Even when you watch it on YouTube later, it's not Hollywood Squares again. And that's very distracting.
Sure. I hear you, and look, I'm glad, and and I think people find their entryway into Judaism in a lot of different ways, and I think some through intellectual stimulation, some through just through spiritual involvement, some through social. I mean, it's all this. So we'll keep on doing this. We'll keep on doing this stuff too.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful that you have all these programs on YouTube, that people can have access to them anytime. It's wonderful.
All right. Well, very good. Well, I'll end the Zoom here. I'll end the live stream here, and we will next week. Next week I will be doing this class. I will be doing it from Colorado. So for me it'll be more like breakfast and learn rather than lunch and learn.
At the same time.
I'll be doing keeping the same time. So it'll be 9:30 a.m. Mountain Time and 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time. So we'll see where it goes.
All right.